Hello and welcome to another video review from AV Forums. I'm Phil Hinton, I'm the editor and I have been since 2003. I'm also a fully trained and qualified THX and ISF calibrator with 16 years of experience. In today's video we're looking at the BenQ W2700 4K DLP projector. If you like our reviews and want to see more of them while supporting our channel, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell to be informed every time we upload new video content. Also, don't forget to check out the Projector forums at Europe's largest AV community on AV Forums to see what owners of this BenQ think about it after normal use in their homes. The BenQ W2700 is a 4K DLP projector that currently retails for around £1,400 at the time of this review in September 2019. The model is also known as the HT3550 in North America. The W2700 uses the latest 0.47-inch Dmd chip from Texas Instruments, which uses a quadruple flash that tricks the eye into seeing an 8.3 million pixel image on the screen. The DMD is 1920 by 1080 in resolution, but by just using this technique it can give you a pseudo 4K image on screen and at a significantly lower cost than a native 4K chip. It also has new features this year which add in a dynamic iris and improved tone mapping to assist with HDR image reproduction. It also has a 6-segment RGB color wheel that boasts 100% Rec.709 coverage and 95% wide color gamut DCI P3 coverage with the use of a filter. BenQ also boasts that the projector is factory calibrated to the industry standards, and it comes with a printed certificate to highlight this point. We'll obviously be checking that claim very closely in the measurement section. In terms of high dynamic range, the projector supports HDR10 and HLG standards. It also has a 4K motion enhancer mode that adds interpolation, but this is switched off by default as BenQ adheres to filmmaker requests to have it switched off. 24 frames per second material is also correctly displayed by the BenQ with the optimal pull down that reduces telesign judder or induced judder so you see the content as it's intended. It's clear that BenQ are serious about upholding the home cinema mantra of as the director intended, with factory calibration and technologies on board that improve image quality without unnecessary enhancement features. These features are here with colour adjustment, edge enhancement and so on, but they're switched off by default in the accurate movie modes. The chassis is a traditional projector body design with the lens positioned to the right side of the front plate. This has a square opening and lens cover with a straight edge cover to the bottom of the lens, which is designed to stop light spill when it's ceiling mounted. Above the lens on the top plate we have a sliding door which opens to reveal the lens shift, focus and zoom controls that are manual in operation. These should be set once and forget, and during our testing the lens held its focus point between numerous viewing sessions. With the introduction of the lens shift, you should be able to set up the W2700 correctly without using keystone. As we say in every projector review, you need to avoid keystone adjustments as it destroys detail retrieval in your image and will also cause image artifacts. Take the time to properly install the projector and you will be rewarded with the best image quality. To the rear of the W2700 we have the built-in speakers behind the grille, and in the centre are the connections. We have analog and digital audio outputs, a USB port for power, 2 HDMI 2.0B ports that can support 60p 4K signals with HDR10 and HLG, one USB 3.0 port with media player capabilities, a mini USB for service, as well as an RS232C and 12V trigger ports. The remote control supplied with the W2700 is a familiar BenQ white plastic design with large central directional and enter keys. It's backlit for use in the dark, and all the other buttons are direct access keys, and the layout is intuitive to use and it sits neatly in the hand. As we always do within our reviews, we measured the out-of-the-box presets to find those that get as close as possible to the industry standards. The idea is that a display must get close to these standards in at least one of its picture modes, so end users can see content as it was mastered and intended to be seen. Calibration is a goal for some users, but with the majority this is not an option, so actually knowing how accurate the out-of-the-box presets are is very important in any honest display review. We see absolutely no point in assessing and reviewing displays in only the the perfectly calibrated picture modes, as that doesn't reflect what the vast majority of buyers will experience with this projector. Calibration and measurement are important for the overall assessment of the display, but we don't only focus on the calibrated performance here at AV Forums. Thankfully, BenQ is also interested in offering the end user an accurate out-of-the-box image and factory calibrate every W2700 projector before delivery. They also include a printed document verifying that this has been done. So just how accurate is the BenQ 2700? The projector has a built-in dynamic iris which can be switched off, but we found that doing this didn't produce the most accurate image results. Leaving the DI switched on actually gave us the most accurate measurement results, which makes sense as the DI is intended to be used by the BenQ. This does, however, pose some issues with calibration, as we'll find out. Looking at the grayscale, we can see that out of the box in the D-Cinema mode for SDR content, it's pretty accurate, with a good track from black to white with just a rise of green in the brighter whites of the scale. There is a little bit too much red in the black area of the grayscale, and this can be seen slightly in the blacks if you go looking for it. Gamut also tracks well, and we have to remember and bear in mind that the DI has to be in operation for us to achieve this result, which shows just how well it works with the gamma tracking as close as it does. Delta E errors are just above the visible threshold of 80% stimulus, which means that we can see a very slight cyan tint in the brightest whites of the content. However, we actually don't think any normal end user will ever see these slight errors within the grayscale at all, especially not with film and TV content playback on screen. This means that given this is the second BenQ W2700 we've measured in our room with the same results, it would appear that the BenQ factory calibration setup does work to a certain degree. However, we should also point out that with any display, especially one using a bulb as its light source, this will change from unit to unit and over a period of time. However, it's great to see BenQ taking the trouble to factory calibrate to try and get as accurate as possible out of the box. Moving to the Rec.709 colour gamut, and this has been an area where single chip budget DLP models like the 2700 have struggled in the past. Usually this has been with the green side of the gamut not reaching the full size of 709. However, as you can see here, the BenQ does a very good job of trying to cover the entire gamut with the correct tracking points for saturation covered. It is far from perfect, and there are some errors seen within the graph, such as the oversaturation of red at each point, a large hue error with magenta at 75% stimulus, along with cyan not quite tracking correctly. But given this is a budget DLP, the gamut is covered and green is also properly tracked, which has always been an issue with displays like this. With the errors seen, we have an average delta E of 3.36 with a maximum error clocking in at 6.35, so it could be a little bit more accurate. However, as we have already said, the consumer at this end of the market with the BenQ is not going to actually see these errors as major issues and will probably not see them in the content playback. It could be better, but given what BenQ has done at this price point, we think they've done extremely well and the end user will benefit from some reasonably accurate image quality out of the box. And let's remember, at this price point, nobody's going to get this projector professionally calibrated. Thankfully, the BenQ W2700 does come with calibration controls for fixing the grayscale and colour gamut, but with a DI getting in the way of the process, it was tricky. We could have calibrated with the DI switched off, but as the BenQ is designed to perform at its best with it in use, we had to move between off and on and try and balance the calibration and performance parameters to get the best out of the W2700. What we found was slightly disappointing. The grayscale controls do work and we were able to balance out the tracking to a certain degree, but with the DI switched on, it does distort the results, especially at the higher and lower end of the track. But for the majority of the grayscale, the errors are unseen, with gamma tracking well, and overall, while not a huge improvement over the out-of-the-box results, it was better. Sadly, the same can't be said for the Colour Management System, or CMS, which we found to be broken in our review samples. So no matter what adjustments we tried to perform, they didn't have any effect on the BenQ. So ultimately, we are stuck with the out-of-the-box results for the CMS, with the slight adjustments to the grayscale having minimal effect. However, we have to acknowledge that at this price point, very few end users will have a professional calibration done, and in that case, the out-of-the-box results are what matter here for most potential owners. And if the two review samples are anything to go by, you can expect reasonable accuracy for a bulb-based projector. As this is a projector review, we have to again cover the fact that a projector, especially in the £1,500 and below range, will never be able to get close to a TV display in how it represents an HDR image. The lack of brightness, dynamic range, and the fact it's a reflective technology means that HDR on a projector is substantially different to that on a TV. Even laser machines costing tens of thousands of pounds cannot produce an HDR image that can get close to a TV display. So HDR is handled differently by projectors, with tone mapping and dynamic iris control being used to try and give as much contrast to an image as possible. We used a 90-inch screen area for our measurements. The W2700 is not the brightest projector when it's in its accurate HDR mode, where we measured 70 nits peak brightness and contrast came in at 2032 to 1. Again, this is in the most accurate mode. It is possible to get much higher peak brightness results, but with an image that is far away from being anywhere close to accurate. As well as this, we have to remind readers and viewers that peak brightness is just one small measurement that doesn't tell the entire story of how the BenQ's HDR image will look. We also have to look at the tone mapping and the use of the DI, along with the fact that to reach the wide colour gamut, it needs a filter inserting into the light path. Looking at the out-of-the-box PQ EOTF results, we can see that the BenQ struggles with a lack of dynamic range and brightness, and it does what it can to stay with the standard down low, but it rolls off pretty quickly. This is not an HDR projector that can produce any specular highlights at all, and dynamic range within images does not produce any real difference to SDR images. Wide colour gamut is noticeable, and the tone mapping does allow for a consistent APL image to be displayed, just don't expect blinding results and highlights. Colour gamut coverage, thanks to the filter used on the W2700, is interesting when looking at saturation points within DCI P3 coverage. There are large errors with magenta, and cyan is off track, along with limited brightness within the colours before clipping. However, it does track reasonably well given the issues, and with a DLP projector it is unheard of. There's not much in the way of colour volume, and with HDR images there are no obvious bright and bold colour saturations due to the lack of dynamics and brightness. But skin tones look natural and the image has a degree of colour to it, it's just not an HDR image given the lack of brightness, contrast and dynamics. BT 2020 measured 71% XY and 77% UV, with P3 measuring in at 92% XY and 94% UV. So we've established that the BenQ W2700 is not the brightest of projectors out there, and with accurate HDR playback that is especially true with the filter being used. So how much does that impact on the actual image performance? In a light controlled cinema room like our test facility, the BenQ W2700 gives one of the most cinematic and impressive images that we've seen from a budget 4K projector. We should qualify that with the fact that we are assessing this as a £1,500 DLP projector and not against our reference JVC DLA X7900. The black levels are acceptable in that they are a darker grey than competing DLP models, and there is a little shadow detail to be seen in the lower reaches of the image before it all becomes one shade of dark grey. Image brightness is good for dark surroundings and allows the BenQ W2700 to display a nicely coloured and textured image that is sharp and detailed. With SDR content, the W2700 is capable of a nice image accuracy with grayscale and colour reproduction, added to image sharpness and excellent 24 frames per second pull down for motion. You should ignore the blue striping in the images here, as the camera shutter was matching the colour wheel and creating the issue that isn't visible to the eye. HDR material was very similar to the SDR performance, but just a tad darker thanks to the colour filter being used. We actually started watching HDR content without the wide colour filter after a while, as the image brightness was just too dim to expand the colours in any meaningful or accurate way, and they were just a little too hot. Switching the filter off brightened up proceedings with HDR discs and content with a Rec.709 palette instead, which worked perfectly well enough. We're never going to get true HDR playback from this level of projector, but the Rec.709 coverage, like that on the BenQ, films still look cinematic and highly watchable. The lens is a high precision 10 element 8 group array that provides a sharp enough image that retains sharpness across the lens and image face, with no soft corners being visible and no obvious visible issues with chromatic aberration when set up correctly. Overall, we were impressed with the image quality on offer at this price point, with the W2700 performing better than some other higher priced DLP rivals. While the blacks will never be inky and colours over Rec.709 are flat and dull, the sweet point of Rec.709 colour added to the perceived 4K resolution, image sharpness and motion, the BenQ is an excellent budget home cinema projector. It is encouraging to see BenQ trying to push their budget projectors to produce accurate images and try and present film correctly. Taking into account the price point versus performance, the W2700 is the best 4K DLP projector we've tested at this and higher price points. We need to manage expectations, and blacks are just a smidge better than mediocre, with the same lack of shadow detail as similar 4K DLPs, and the 2700 is painfully dull when it comes to full HDR colour mode. But even so, when set up correctly and ditching some of the HDR features like the wide colour gamut filter, you will be left with some serious value for money. With normal HD and 4K content using the Rec.709 colour gamut, we get a truly interesting proposition at the price point, with a performance that is actually very cinematic in dark rooms with little ambient light. Taking into account and accepting the dark grey blacks, a lack of total shadow detail retrieval, and above black performance, which is non-existent at this price point, when you add in the excellent image sharpness, good motion with 24 frames per second material, and decent colour and grayscale accuracy towards Rec.709, we get what can only be described as a Best Buy projector.